I would never would have guessed that we could play in a stadium in India, and we're on the dirt floor stadium. There's so many people that they can't even hardly breathe. They're like stuffed like sardines.
Today's guest is a guitarist extraordinaire, Steve Morse. His rock and roll resume runs deep. Dixie Dregs, Kansas, Deep Purple, the Steve Morse Band, and so many others. But today he joins us to discuss his forthcoming new album, Triangulation, and his U.S. tour dates. Steve, how are you today?
All right. Hey, everybody.
So, listen, you've been at it for about, 50 plus years from now. So, in looking at let's say your rock and roll resume, it's so many albums. Do you have any idea off the top of your head how many full albums you released across the board amongst all your bands and projects?
No, actually, I never added it up because it's sort of like, it's like eating or something. You don't, I guess in a day you could say, well, I ate 2 times or ate 3 times. But beyond that, you don't think, well, how many times did I eat this week, or how many times did I eat this month? Well, how many times did I eat this year? And the last decade, how many times? It's just as a musician, it's in your nature to do music, so it just keeps happening. Yeah. And ever since I got semi-retired, I think a lot of people discovered I would work for free or thereabouts, and so I got more work than I've ever had in my life. When I stopped touring with Purple, and I can't do it all. So, I'm finally at the point where I was saying, I need to do work with my band, and let's get back to that music, the direction. And that's what's happened. That's what propelled this album. Is really, it's just Dave, Van, and I just deciding to do it. And we discovered that there was plenty of material, and it was fun having Dave come over almost every day, for months. We just mess around, talk, and work on some ideas.
So I'm curious, Steve, because I think you've worked with Van and Dave for many, many years now. And like I said, I'm a Jersey guy, and I believe both of those guys are from New Jersey, correct?
They are. There's something about the water up there, because everybody in our touring group is from New Jersey too.
See that? It's funny. Van Romaine, I met him in person. Guess it was about a year ago. He's in a band with Jimmy Coons and Angus Clark called Coons Clark, a little classic rock band, and they played up by us. And super nice guy. He's done a lot of work.
Van is incredibly versatile. He was working with so many different people over these years, and he just, I don't know. They both have this ability to just sort of walk into anything and just, set down their equipment and start playing with whoever.
So, Steve, I wanted to ask you a question before we get into the new album. Just a little bit about your upbringing. So I was reading online about your back history, and there's sort of this like rumor out there that says you got kicked out of school because you're a musician and you didn't cut your hair, and that landed you in the University of Miami early, which is where you met Rod Morgenstein, and the rest is history. Is that all true? Fact?
Well, I think there's the error there. I wasn't kicked out because I was a musician. I was kicked out approximately every 2 weeks because of my hair. And this started years before I actually got expelled. They would just, the superintendent just loved to go around the schools and find people like me whose hair touched their ears, or, oh my God, covered part of their ears. And, I was a good guy. I was doing the work and getting good grades and everything. In the summers, well, all the time, we would play down at the coffee house in Augusta, Georgia. And there was a big military base there, Fort Gordon. And, sometimes with the cover bands I played in, we would go play it at the base, play at the officers club or play at the enlisted men's club. And got to know just, they're just young guys, from all over the country that either got drafted or joined the service. And a lot of them got drafted. Mm. So anyway, we were playing down at the coffee house, and as usual, a large contingent of guys from the fort would come. And some of them had long hair, and I was going, how do you do that? They said, we're in the Guard, man. I said, what? Well, tell me about it. They said, we have wigs, man. And so I said, you're kidding me. You mean you can go to your monthly thing? And these guys in the National Guard they could go do their deployment. And the deployment that they happened to be seeing us was at Fort Gordon. So they do their deployment wearing a short-haired wig. And so it was in the summer. And, I just remember the principal coming to me the last day of school, the absolute last moment, and said, oh, by the way, if you want your report card, you're going to have to cut your hair and report to my office. Just to, just get that last little twist in, so that the whole summer, I'd look, like I was out of basic training. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just, as a young kid in the 60s, I would just try and to look like my musical heroes, Anyway, so the next year I came back to school with a short hair wig. It was really uncomfortable, but I wore it, got good grades, and was on good terms with everybody. Everything was cool. My principal of the new school I went to was even cool. But the Board of Education found out that some of us had been doing this, and they passed a rule saying that guys cannot wear a short hair wig. I mean, I don't. This is what the Board of Education was worried about. That, like,
oh my God,
not curriculum, not what do we teach our kids, or how are they able to cope with the world? Just this is the problem, So they started kicking everybody out that wouldn't cut their hair, and then when they got to me, I was 16. And I knew that I could legally walk away. And this principal came to me and said, I'm sorry, I know you've been a great student. You're the junior class president, which I gladly joined because I was trying to get some good bands to play at the junior senior. By good bands, I mean bands that some of the students would have hated because they were heavy bands and not dance bands. Anyway, and including our band, conflict of interest, as an early politician, I was already conflicted because I wanted my band to play at some of those dances too. Anyway, right. Yeah, but the principal said, I really started to do this. And so I said, I understand. You've been great. We shook hands. I cleaned out my locker, and that was that.
And that was it. And you left. Yeah. Didn't cut your hair. Didn't stand for that bull crap. That was it. The rest is history. But that did land you to the musical school at University of Miami, correct?
Because the previous summer, I took some college courses, with this honors early entry program that I was able to transfer somehow. I never had a college or a high school diploma. So it was weird the way it worked out, but back then everything was done with the mail, and it was really slow and everything. So if I was dealing with some form online to for my registration, it probably wouldn't have worked.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing story. You're also, did I read correctly? You're also a pilot, like you fly planes as well? When did that whole thing come into this amongst your career?
Well, this year I've been flying 50 years also, and uh, I I was down at the University of Miami, and Pat Metheny was leaving to go on tour. And Pat and I were friends, and he held one of the coolest gigs you could possibly have, working at the Coconut Grove Playhouse for off-Broadway shows. They were doing Jesus Christ Superstar at the time, and he'd done so many weeks of it, and Gary Burton was going out on tour, so Pat offered for me to audition to take his place, and that was so awesome because it meant like a 2.5 or 3 hour day. Once you get the book, and the book was this thick of your parts and cues and stuff. But once I went through the book once with the orchestra leader who was a piano player, and he was cool. He could talk while he's playing the parts and say, now this upcoming part I want you to get to I'm gonna bring it down, fade it in, now play, come on, here you go now, and we went through the thing, and then I started doing the shows. Now I was only at work for 2.5 to 3 hours. So, and good money. So I signed up for a, get your pilot slices now deal.
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah, as soon as I did, I learned that I needed an instrument rating too. So I did the instrument rating as soon as I had the 150 or 200 hours, whatever they were required back then. And it was a lot cheaper then than it is now. And just like, I feel sorry for young people on so many levels, because the things that I wanted to do, I was able to do. And it's almost impossible now, unless you're going to learn to fly as a job and take a student loan out. It's hard to get a license without paying some major bucks, and it's hard for musicians that want to play to find gigs. Back then there was no iPhones, there was no computers, home computers. There was just people would go out to listen to music, and there was gigs everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're still actively flying now that you're partially retired?
Yeah. If I average 300 something hours a year. So
Okay.
almost every day.
Is it more out of curiosity? Is it just for pleasure? Like you pick a destination and say, hey, I want to go here to visit some friends, or do you take the band with you, or what's it all about?
Yeah, I used to have a twin engine plane and flew the band for about 30 years. So I had two different planes that were the band plane, and I paid for those by not buying flights, and that was really, really, really good experience.
Sure.
And yeah, today it's just at the end of the day, after working outside or whatever, I get cleaned up and then get in the plane and just go up um, with a can of my favorite carcinogenic beverage, non-alcoholic, but
Of course.
and look down and relax and look how beautiful everything is again. And I go on lots of trips, like across the country. I like to go out west in little airplanes for some reason, and it really puts things in perspective to see yourself, just barely clearing a mountain in a beautiful desert setting or something like that. Yeah, I love it.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, the average person, we just get in our cars. Maybe we go for a, stress relief after work and just get lost for 20 minutes. But wow, what an experience.
Hey,
So, Steve,
you
what's
just
that?
said something that's really cool. I didn't know that people still enjoy traveling in their cars, because I actually am fine with taking a trip in a car too, or an RV or whatever. I just like going when I don't have a schedule.
Yeah.
So much of my life has been, you have to get here in the next 8 hours, and it's a 9 hour drive, it's stuff like that. It's been stress, most of my life traveling wise. So I love traveling, for the fun of it.
It's funny, Steve. I'm like one of your typical modern day. I work from home, right? So I never leave my house. I got kids and dogs and all this other stuff, and I feel like in a sense I got to get away. So sometimes that break is just to get in the car. I want to hear some music. I'm actually disappointed. I got a brand new car this year and it doesn't have a CD player in it. And even though I'm with the times, I got this stack of hundreds of CDs and I'm like, oh, that was one of my favorite rituals. Putting a CD in the car, cranking it up, getting a cup of coffee and driving whatever, whether I'm alone or with my family. So
Now
it
you got to
still
do it on
exists.
your phone. You got to
Yeah.
transfer from your phone.
Yeah.
That works.
But
That's cool. I like that. My son is like that. He enjoys driving, and yeah, I I think it's amazing that everyone can afford an automobile pretty much. If you can afford a phone, you can afford an automobile. Split the cost with another person, and have something that takes you anywhere in the country.
exactly.
Maybe
Exactly.
not reliably. If you're buying a $500 automobile, it may not be reliable, but you'll learn about fixing them too.
Right, exactly. I took my 11-year-old daughter last Friday. It was right before school started. She's my youngest. And I said, you know what? We have a family beach house on the Jersey Shore, but I always like to get out in the mountains a little bit. So I texted my good friend and I said, hey, man, you know everything about Jersey. Give me somewhere to go, a destination on my maps that's 1 hour away. And he gave me this destination. It was a waterfall. It took me an hour to get there. My daughter and I went a hike down the trail, went to this waterfall. We explored. We went to a few lakes, got some dinner, got some ice cream, and it was a perfect 6 hours.
That's awesome. And you got some beautiful terrain to work with. Uh, we used to fly when we flew into New York City. We were always landed, what was it, Red Banks or Ocean? Not, I can't remember the
Yeah.
names of the airports that were just off the coast, and
Hmm.
it was beautiful. Jersey is
It's
a
well,
beautiful state. You got to get off the turnpike and see it.
exactly, exactly. Well, we got the coast, you got the mountains, and yeah, got a lot of little airports. So listen, Steve, we want to come back to some of your musical history a little bit later, but I want to
Yeah.
focus on triangulation. So maybe my first question is, as you alluded to at the top of the hour, having you released a massive amount of instrumental music over the years, how do you come up with new ideas or get the motivation to say, I've already released 30 instrumental albums. What's next? How do you come up with those ideas?
Well, like earlier, I was talking about how much I love taking long trips in the plane or a car or RV or whatever. Writing songs is about the same thing. It's something that nags at me until I do it. And after I do it for a while, I'm sort of satisfied for a little while, and then it'll start to come back again. It's just something I feel like compelled to do. And well, like last night, I was working on this idea, and I was imagining this real majestic thing, and I worked on it, and it's good. It's good, but it's not what I envisioned. So I got to go crack that apart and figure out what is it that's not scratching that itch. So I am constantly working on ideas. There's no reason for this idea, by the way. It just it's just something that I was hearing, imagining, not really hearing, but just imagining in my head. And a lot of the stuff I've written is for a purpose, like we need a this or that, or can you fix this tune or whatever. But the stuff I enjoy the most is where there's no pressure, and it's just me, sitting alone at 2 a.m.
So how did you approach this triangulation album? You said you got with your bandmates, they came down, you jammed out. Like, how would you describe the new music? Like, what kind of variety of songs are going to be on this album?
It's a good variety, and the band came down at times, but Dave lives here, so we could get together regularly, and for short periods, and I love that. Like they say, what'd you do since Monday? I said, well, I got some different ideas. I said, oh, great, because I just learned the stuff from Monday. I said, yeah, that's okay. This is similar, but and so we just work on another variation something like that. It was relaxing and fun because again, there's nobody standing over us saying you got to get this done, because we know that the market for a band's album is like, I don't know. I mean, there used to be a tiny market for that, but now it's something you do because I guess it's like people doing pen and ink drawings. People, if you do it really well, people will appreciate it and maybe be inspired from it. But the
Yeah.
world as a whole doesn't care if there's another pen and ink drawing or another album.
Yeah.
So it has to be something that you do from your heart that you absolutely love.
Yeah. And I would think for you, again, especially rewarding writing with your bandmates. So in terms of planning for the album, I know you are getting out on the road. You got some dates in October, including some up by me, but when do you plan on releasing singles? Is the album going to come out at some point in the near future? Like, what are the plans, or is there no blueprint?
Yeah, there's a blueprint. It's unusual in the sense that there are going to be some singles
Yeah.
that are going to come out before the tour, and I don't know, maybe if it's one or two or whatever, and some videos and stuff like that. And then the album is actually one thing we're trying to do that so far is on track is to maybe have some CDs there at the gigs,
Mhm.
and not available anywhere else. Wasn't exactly planned that way, but the release date was delayed by every little thing.
Yes.
We got a problem with this, we got to fix it. Okay, or that this thing had a need to be in a different format. Okay, change that. This mix was good, but it needs to be in some other uh, form, or we're changing the song order. Everything you do delays it. So now we got the release in officially happening right after the tour. So that's why we're having some video or videos come out, during the tour.
Okay. What about the tour itself? So you guys are going to be together. Like, what would fans expect? Is this a combination of your repertoire of your career? Like, what can fans expect on this tour in terms of like the set list?
Well, this is going to be unlike any tour we've ever done. We're going to do, the core uh, Steve Morse vibe, Steve Morse Band vibe, and it's definitely a band. It's not me calling the shots
Yeah.
anymore. It's when I first met Van and Dave, I was touring, and I think with Kansas. Um, anyway, we went to this club that they knew the guy, and they'd set up, and we agreed on some songs. They played 4 songs with me, and I was like, "Hey, we could have done a gig tonight, man. That's great. You guys
Mhm.
really know how to bring it." And I think that core vibe has grown to them, being my friends for decades, and we're close and enjoy company together, and so they're equal members of the band. However, with all the stuff happening on the new album, there's a lot of things with layered parts and overdubs that over the years I put on albums, and those are not ideal to play live because of the extra parts. So that was our sort of emphasis. Let's talk about having a fourth member for some gigs. And I had just gone up to Jersey, actually to Manhattan, and done a video with Angel Vivaldi. He was doing a cover of a Jean-Luc Ponty song, which I thought was really cool. He's a younger guy than me, which is odd because I'm like 29 and I've been playing for over 50 years. But he's a younger guy, super super competent in every possible way, and he was even producing his own video. And to see him, going for all, the difficult parts of this and making it, and everybody, doing the video was playing live along with the recording, but able to do it live. And that was a lot of fun. It made the shoot seem like fun. And so I thought, if something comes up, we should work with this guy. He seems like he can cover whatever it is. So on the tour, Angel is going to be playing guitar and covering pretty much anything I tell him. If it's a keyboard part, he could probably do that on the guitar synth. But he's going to be doing, guitar parts and, some solos and some flashy things too. But the idea is to flesh out the live sound a little bit instead of, doing. There's so many concerts happening where people are pretending to play, and it's a recording. Obviously, when you play small venues, everyone knows, everything that's going on with your performance because they're right there, like a few feet away. And I like that about that aspect of live recording. But anyway, Angel's one of those guys. He can play under pressure and play extremely difficult stuff, like Dave LaRue on bass. So, by the way, Angel also produced the videos, which were done with a large budget. But the large budget was actually a shoestring. So it was done on a large shoestring budget.
There you go.
He worked really well with that. It was fun. And, he didn't have, like I said, he didn't have much subject material to work with on the video and, taking pictures of us, but he did a great job.
He sounds like an integral piece of the album and the touring itself. So I look forward. There's a show in Jersey and Red Bank. Hopefully I get down to see you guys and maybe meet you in person. But hey, Steve, I have an interesting question. I was in the car last weekend with my 88-year-old father, who's a retired accordion player, and he's got a keen sense of music. And it was on XM radio. Eric Johnson's Cliffs of Dover came on. And my father asked this question. He said, "Oh, listen to this guitar player. It's an instrumental piece." And he said, Did he write the songs inspired by the Cliffs of Dover, which are an important piece of something in the UK about World War II history, which I didn't even know? And I said, "You know what, Pop? I have no idea, but I'm going to ask Steve Morse. Does the piece of music inspire the song title, or do you come up with a song title and then you go, all right, well, this is a song title or a piece of something, and I'm going to write music that feels like it supports that title"? Which way does it go?
Both. But
Okay.
usually with instrumental stuff, usually the title comes later. It's like when you finish it, what does this make me think of? What does this remind me of? And like one of the songs on the new album is called March of the Nomads. And this, everything about it reminds me of an incredibly obscure piece of history, of European history, involving forced migration of some people that were kind of like gypsies, and but Gaelic areas and Celtic areas. So the title that Eric Johnson is on our album, by the way, Eric Johnson and he's been one of my favorite guitarists since I've heard him is in the mid to late 70s. That's 1970s for you young folks. Some young people, 1870s. When was that? No, 1970. And the song he's playing on is called Texas, TEX capital US, Texas, because that's where I met him, and we played gigs together. Is in Texas, and he's from Texas, and it's a tune that's along that same kind of, energetic, happy, instrumental vibe that we used to do. And John Petrucci, who's absolutely the top of the list of he's the guy that was I was trying to do what he does now, and I never quite made it. But he's absolutely, mastered the techniques on the electric guitar, along with being very musical and a fantastic writer and an improviser. So I've known him for decades also, and he's playing on another tune that I don't know. I think it's great to have him. That's the triangulation tune. Now that tune doesn't refer to him, but it just happens to be the tune that he fit most musically with, and does a fantastic job. Then plays a solo that I can't even imagine how humans can do it with that kind of precision. But most of the titles come afterwards. In fact, it begets one of the problems that I have with my material is to say what's happening on the unexpected. It's the unexpected, and they say A minor counterpoint. Oh, because we put working titles on everything. Okay. That the unexpected is A minor counterpoint, and the opening track of the album is in my mind is A funk bass melody, because I have to differentiate things in my mind. So when I see this long list of ideas I'm working on, that I can pick it out and say, yeah, I think this would be good for the album. So yeah, I have working titles that are descriptive of the type of music it is, on a technical level. And then later, you have time when you're working on an album. You definitely have time to think about the titles.
So, see, my father had a crystal ball. Who knew? Here we are talking about Eric Johnson being a guest. And that says a lot as adept and experience of a player you are, for you to compliment John Petrucci. Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say you listen to what he does, and I don't see how you can't find anybody that can do that better. You can find lots of amazing guitarists in this world, and I'm friends with a lot of them, but John is on this level that I always wished I could see what the view is like up there, but it's too rare. Their air is too rare for me.
Air is too rare. Well, Steve, I look forward to hearing this body of work and seeing this stuff live. And we wish you luck with that. Want to touch a little bit about your back history. A couple questions on the Dixie Dregs in Kansas. So, you're talking about your style of music that you write as an instrumental artist, but, the Dixie Dregs, to me, I was too young to remember them early, even though I was born in the 70s, but they were kind of genre defining for an album to come out in 76, 77. It was a fusion of rock and jazz, classical, a little bit of country. So I'm always curious, when you guys got signed to a record label, like, and getting audiences at that time in the late 70s, was it hard for record labels and an audience to understand who you guys were? Because it was kind of avant-garde for the time in terms of rock music.
Oh yeah. We never fit in, and it was always the labels that happened to have somebody that looked at it as an art/integrity project, and not a money-making thing. And sure, they would try to sell albums and stuff, and the way the album deals are structured, they can still make a little money even though the artist doesn't. But Phil Walden was the first one. Phil Walden from Capricorn Records, and he actually he loved music. He was a really critical listener, and I enjoyed the artistic level of interaction, with being around record company presence that could really, get into the music rather than this is a hit, this is not a hit, and you're never going to have. And we're doing electric chamber music. The really, I don't know anybody else that was doing that electric rock based band that we were doing. So it was a kind of a new niche to live in. The only thing that kept us going was seeing that if we played in front of people, they enjoyed it. And we just happened to luck on the right kind of length of tunes and length of solos and type of melodies and having melody be a part of almost every part or every musical instrument part. It really helped. But I think that Capricorn starting by signing us, it's what made the other labels interested. And thank goodness for the Allman Brothers being broken up, ending their tour, and Twigs Lennon and Chuck Leavell coming to our show in Nashville and telling the head of the record company that he's got to hear this band. A band, a record company who already rejected us. They all rejected us. In fact, I remember being in the walls of my $45 a month apartment were really ugly. And I papered them with these rejection letters. So, when I wake up, there was just a wall of rejection letters. It was only one wall because I had the fan pointing me from that direction. Otherwise, it would have blown them around and kept me from sleeping. And they all, would send the sealed album back with the shrink wrap still on it and say, "This is not the kind of music for us." And of course, they hadn't even listened to it. So that's we got signed by luck, but happened to be with a record company president that saw the value of having some different kind of music, for art's sake. And I think that's what we were. We were kind of like just something to round out a label's offering. Like we have the things that are going to make money in this genre, make money in this genre, and make money in this genre. Then we got the weird artsy stuff, and that's what we were.
Okay, but it was still definitely unique for the times. Now you talk about, Steve, when you had your couple of years in Kansas, you talk about like a different departure, right? Kansas at that point in time, they kind of shifted like so many other rock bands into like this AOR direction. You come in, I was always curious because there are some cool songs like Power, Tomb 19. They were very, very, very cool tracks, but was it difficult for you to adapt your more experimental style to fit this kind of radio friendly like direction they were going in?
Well, let's put things in perspective. When I got with the guys, they had been broken up for years, and I was talking to Phil Ehart at a concert in Atlanta, because we lived 45 minutes away from each other. And he said, "Yeah, we're getting the band back together." I said, "That's awesome." And said, with Steve Walsh, I said, "It's great. You guys haven't played in so many years. That's really cool. I can't wait to hear it." And if you need any song ideas, man, I feel like a kindred thing with Kerry Livgren, writing wise. A lot of the stuff we did, used the same kind of simple polychords and having melody be a focus of a lot of the instrumental pieces. So I've always been a fan of Kerry's writing too. And he wasn't going to be part of it So anyway, Phil said, "Hey, we're getting together Tuesday. Why don't you come over, and we'll just kick it around?" I said, "All right, that sounds cool." So it was very organic. We were just going to sit around and jam and work on an idea or two. And by the end of the day, we had most of a tune done. And I was writing very successfully with Steve Walsh, and the band had no shortage of opinions to say, yeah, it needs to be more of this and less of that. And so it was working very successfully and without any effort, really. I mean, writing takes the effort, but the mechanics and the chemistry was really good. So the whole first album, and I thought I was going to help write one song, and then hey, let's come back next week. Let's do this again. All right, cool. I'm not doing anything, and my trio hadn't been doing anything, and the Dregs had already been broken up, so it worked out good for me. But one after another, we eventually came up with an album worth of stuff. The second album was a different story because now we had direct company management and MTV type people saying you got to have a ballad hit, or something like that. And so we were writing with people, with officially successful writers from LA and stuff. And it started to, dawn on me that maybe this whole, commercial side of the music business was bigger than I was. And, I felt like I was shrinking a little bit inside. And I still, tried my best with everything. And we did get some good success, even out of that second album, thanks to Bob Ezrin. But at some point, I became uncomfortable with the direction that the music was going, being led by video, TV, and again, this sort of faddish thing. Everything has to fit into the latest thing, or else it just doesn't exist. And that was a lot of pressure that didn't. I just wasn't built for that. That's all. So I just wasn't the right guy for the job at some point. But yeah, on our first album, we were just like a bunch of guys that might have got together in Kansas. We were in Georgia at the time, but we might have.
Well, there you go.
It was just a bunch of normal guys that happened to have good chemistry together. So it was really cool.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So thanks for clarifying that. So, Steve, I want to get into your Deep Purple era. I was a humongous supporter of your time in the band. And, I know they say you're not supposed to geek out and fanboy when you talk to guys like you, but sometimes you have to. So, but Steve, when you joined, and I will say this and sincerely, Perpendicular is like a top 10 album not a Deep Purple album, top 10 album of all time for me. I was 26 years old when that album came out, and I can't tell you how many fucking times I played that CD, man. But anyway, I think in that album, like your playing brought such amazing contrast to that traditional Deep Purple style. Songs like Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming, The Aviator, A Touch Away, just beautifully rich with melody and so much emotion. So maybe take me back to that time when you joined the band and memories of making that album with the guys.
Well, that happened during the honeymoon period, just like I was describing with Kansas, where everybody's guard is down and the ideas are just flowing. There's no expectations. There's no preconceived notions. And to their credit, the guys were very open to trying my ideas. In fact, Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming was me sitting there noodling, playing this, just messing around, like after tuning my guitar. John Lord said, "Play that again." I said, "Oh yeah, I was just working on just a little idea, figuring would have nothing to do with Purple." I said, no, no, do it again. And then he played along, the backing chords to it. He said, I think there's something there. Let's work on this after we have lunch. By the end of the day, we had the tune done. And that was just one of the, spectacular successes of that open mindset. And I always clicked really well with John Lord on writing ideas because he was the classical guy, of the band. And I had a lot of classical training myself. And we both loved rock and roll. And he was a very energetic rock and roll guy. I mean, he would take his Hammond and tilt it on the edge of it, like pick it up and rake across the keys and stuff like that when he was playing live. So he was a rock and roller that could play classical and understood, the whole majesty and melody and beauty of combining the two. So yeah, that was the Perpendicular album was the perfect way to start, and yeah, I was really, really sad to see him leave.
Funny, just the other night I'm in Jersey, but in Pennsylvania, a band played called Beyond Purple played. It contains Jimmy Bell from House of Lords, and they're pretty good. I'm not usually one to see tribute acts, but I went to see it. It was a cool show. However, in the lobby up in Sellersville, PA, which I saw you are booked to play at, by the way, the Sellersville Theater, they had an organization that was just started called the Evolution of Electronic Instruments. And they had one of John Lord's synthesizers in the room. It was almost like, it's right in front of you and you just want to touch it and go like this. And, the guy said, well, in order to hear the story about when this piece of instrument is from and what it was used for, you got to come to the museum. But, it made me think about, I saw you guys 17 times when you were in the band. And, I've seen the John Lord shows, I've seen the Don Airey shows. And I remember towards the latter part of you being in the band, and maybe it was a result of Ian Gillan aging, and I'm not knocking Ian Gillan's voice, but I felt like the performances changed. You guys were improvising more, you were expanding the songs. You and Don were opening up and really jamming out. And I felt like no two Deep Purple shows were the same. And to me, that was one of the draws of going to see the shows live because, yeah, the set list may have been the same as the previous city, but the performances weren't. So maybe talk a little bit about as your years went on with both John and Don, how did you tackle those improv sections of the shows?
Uh, I always welcomed it and maybe pushed it too hard in some cases, but I used to do a lot of improv before we started Smoking the Water. And to some audiences, that was a really cool thing. And, I think it just grew to be a pain in the butt to the band. Just, because they were there every night. And that's part of playing live is that, some things that you might be feeling, the other guys may not be feeling. I was definitely feeling it, but it was not always mutual. So that's the kind of things you can't control, and life just happens. You get what you get, and things may have drifted differently over the years. But Don is a super capable improviser. In fact, he used to play piano at a theater where they played silent movies, and he would accompany just by looking up. And that's the kind of guy he could improvise at the drop of a hat. And so he was super easy to deal with and cooperate with on improv. Sorry. So that was always good. And he was just a very, very energetic rock and roll performer as well. So he was about as good a choice as you could possibly have to replace John. You know, we had a little bit different dynamic when it came to writing and selecting what to do when, but yeah, it was always fun to improvise with Don too. Um, be, yeah, what are the chances of having two monster keyboard players in a row?
Sure.
But yeah,
Sure. So, Steve, you were in the band for over 25 years. You guys put out 7 studio albums. I mean, I was looking at the list again and I was like, wow, just going back through them and thinking about some of my favorite tracks. But maybe, one of the big things Deep Purple is synonymous is they are a global band. And I mean, but, many bands they play the States, they play Canada, they play the EU, they play the UK, maybe South America, but they don't go too much further than that. Deep Purple goes everywhere. So that must have been an amazing experience. Maybe tell me a little bit about traveling with the band and going to all these places of the world, not just once, but maybe, you know, 10 times over.
that exactly that was I. It made the experience made me wish that every American, in fact, every person in the world could travel more and see the commonality. I would never would have guessed that we could play in a stadium in India back in these days. The internet hadn't really happened, and we're on the dirt floor stadium. There's so many people that they can't even hardly breathe. They're like stuffed like sardines, and they're reacting to the music the same way as the people did in the UK, except that they wouldn't throw beer at me, which is what happened. Because Richie, hometown hero and founder of the band, wasn't there anymore. But that just the people were so genuinely uh, lovable everywhere because they're just people. Like when we went to Bolivia at 13,400 feet, which gives you a permanent headache if you're not used to it. I'm a sea level guy. I fly that high, but I only fly that high for so many hours, and then I could recover. But yeah, when we finally played the show, both the Ians were like taking puffs of oxygen between songs, trying to get through the gig, because it's a lot different standing up and playing guitar than taking deep breaths and playing drums or singing. But the audience out there, they look different, they dress different than us, and everywhere around the world, they have all different uh, things that you can recognize them, on a external level, but on a vibe level, they're exactly the same as you would have playing a show in, I don't know, Atlanta, Georgia, or St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, it was a great thing to see the different cultures and to go to a place where there's no English letters at all. It's all Chinese characters, and trying to talk somebody into making you something to eat that you might recognize, to do it by hand signals, and they all love the challenge that they would come out. Some of them didn't have time for it, but some of them would come out trying to figure out what you want, and like I would point to an egg or something, and maybe some noodles or something. They make me something like that. All those experiences are super valuable to me because I have a lot of patience with people and less patience with authoritarian sort of the I don't know, the bureaucracy of having a country. You have to have a bureaucracy to take care of business, but sometimes that crossing the borders and stuff like that is so difficult in some more areas. Like say we're going into Mexico. I'm sitting there for hours because I don't have the right papers, or we've got a gig in Canada, and I'm sidelined for hours waiting for some verification, and then I have to pay $1,000 for my band to get in because we're not playing at a place with reserved seats. and just these weird rules that pop up everywhere when you're just going to be there a few days or a day.
Yeah.
And that part of traveling I hate, but the part where you're interacting with people and playing music and smiling and having a good time, and they are too. I love that. I feed off that, and I love walking around different uh, cultures and civilizations, and once again seeing the commonality. And Roger Glover and I were close friends in Purple, and Roger always said the same thing. Yeah, yeah, people more alike than they are different. I said I totally agree, and
Yeah.
we we just we were just like every day was another country, and it was normal, and there was nothing to fear except those dealing with the rules and the bureaucracy
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But the people were never the problem.
I was able to see you guys twice in the Netherlands just by chance. I was over in, once was on my honeymoon, and the other time I happened to be over there to see a festival. And even for me, being an American from Jersey, just to go into Western Europe and see classic rock and metal bands in a different country, the audience vibe is so great because over there they're just more respectful. They're not talking in between songs or during instrumental passages. It was like, oh, can't we just get this in the States already? But what are you going to do?
Yeah, and there are places like in Japan where the people are so polite. I mean, they expect a high level of performance, though, but they'll give you that respect before they even have heard you play. They've heard your records maybe, but they expect you to do as well as they're doing. Respect
Yeah.
wise, and in order to have respect for the audience, I think you prepare and play your very best. That's the only way it works. But places like, um, well, yeah, Japan's a great example. Everything works on time. Everything's um, mutual respect, and everything uh, is fascinating for people in the U.S. to experience. And
Steve,
I think they even pay royalties to musicians.
wow. Wow.
I,
How about that? What a novel
I,
idea.
that 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 is amazing. I mean, if they use a song for something, they actually log it and pay it. There are other countries that do, but that's one of the most reliable.
Yeah.
Reliable.
Steve, you wrote a piece of music called "Contact Lost" that was on the Bananas album. It was an emotional piece you wrote about the space shuttle Columbia tragedy. But there's a story behind this one. Would you mind sharing it?
Yeah, we were friends with the astronaut crew via uh, some email, and having met some of them when we played in Houston. And Kalpana Chawla was one of the astronauts. Uh, she studied fluid dynamics and was an astronaut too, but was an expert on the kind of things that ended up happening to the Challenger as it uh, encountered that uh, reentry heat. And she had taken up one of the CDs, uh, and I think it was one that had a live space trucking on it, or maybe it was anyway. The pun was space trucking. It was going to be used for a wake up song, and she had another Deep Purple CD. I'm still friends with her, you know, widowed husband, J.P. Harrison. And anyway, we were watching. Well, everybody had their own room, and we were going to, every day we were going into the studio. And I woke up in time for breakfast, eating myself in my little apartment and looking at the TV while I'm eating my cereal. And there, it happened, you know.
Yeah.
To you know, I always keep my guitar out until I have to go to the studio or to work. So I grabbed my guitar and was just playing along while they were talking about it. And I sort of unconsciously, you know, outlined what became that song. And we were going to the studio to work on a song that was already planned out. But when I got to the studio, I said, before I forget this, can I just put this down? Can you roll it? Because you know, all I had was a memo, a, a real crappy cassette tape recorder at the time. And Michael Bradford said, yeah, let's roll it. And we did it and did it again. And Don played some chords on it. He said, hey, let's get everybody going. Maybe find the tempo and let's put a clip down so maybe you can work on it later. And that became the recording. So it was quick thinking that made that to where, you know, anybody else ever heard it. That was just going to be a little piece that I wanted to remember. And it kind of describing the sadness of the event and the fact that they, you know, there's like a triumphant sort of landing, you know, realizing that with their sacrifice, they furthered the body of knowledge. And that's what you have to do when you're on something so cutting edge and so important that you're risking your life. I mean, they were willingly, you know, in as informed a way as possible. They were willingly taking those chances in order to further the body of knowledge. So I think that's admirable, and I think it's heroic. So that's the way I see it. That's why it ends with a little bit more triumphant of a landing than a minor chord.
Well, appreciate you sharing that personal story, Steve. So, Steve, this has been an awesome hour. Before we conclude, I have a couple of listener questions that came in that I have to ask. So, with the recent passing of Ozzy Osbourne, John Verna wants to know about the Living Loud project because you played Ozzy songs, you reinterpreted them. We're also friends with Bob Daisley. We've had Bob on the show, but take us back to that experience. What was that like working with Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake and playing those great Ozzy songs?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. That was just fun. First of all, Bob Daisley is a very natural writer and producer. You know, he doesn't have to try to do it. He doesn't have to flex his muscles to do it. Do you know who I am or any of that? He just no, I like that, but what you did earlier was better. You know, gentle sort of coaching and nudging that he did enabled me to write the parts that we used, you know, all, you know, song wise and guitar wise, much more relaxed. And the approach I had for the Ozzy songs, and you know, the whole premise was these were songs that they had played an important part in writing, you know, with Randy, and the band was called Blizzard of Oz, and it later became a conflict with Ozzy's management about who's going to get credit, who's not going to get credit, and if somebody spoke up, maybe they would be taken off the album and replaced by other people.
Which happened.
It's very intense. But okay, so Bob was super easy to work with, and while we were doing this, working on some of the original tunes, the idea. I'm talking fast because I know you got to finish up here, but the concept was to do half the album with the songs that they had played a big part in creating and recreating them but with Jimmy Barnes singing. And the other half was going to be original stuff. So like when we do the original stuff, Lee is sitting over there on the drums playing along, and he says, "Oh," and he go up to the microphone and sing or whistle a melody. And I said, "That's how it happened. That's how these guys did it." Lee is a natural melody guy. I mean, he would instantly come up with the perfect melody to go over these changes. And Bob was always, when it finally came time to play bass, after talking about the direction that the idea is going, Bob of course hits a perfect part. And so these guys were super experienced, super I don't know, it's like they were already pre-edited down to the perfect parts. Everything they played or did just worked. And it was amazing to be a part of. And Jimmy Barnes, when he came in after we did the music, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm feeling this. You want me to go with that melody, Lee, for that part? Okay, fine." And he's writing like faster than, a cop writing a ticket. He just zooming through this, and he comes up with these great lyrics. So all in all, that was a wonderful project. And the only reason we didn't do more is because apparently Australia is on the other side of the world.
I got a plane, Steve. You can jump over there. You can fly over there.
We did get together and play a show or two in Australia when Purple was touring there, and Don Airey joined us. Wow. But the album was conceived and written with me, Bob, Lee, and then Jimmy came over later, and I think if they had some overdubs for Don, that was done after the record was done, was recorded.
So another curiosity I've had, we're getting a little off topic, Steve, is you performed, I think, with Luciano Pavarotti with Ian Gillan and Smoke on the Water. What was that experience like?
It was unusual because Pavarotti was a very musical guy, but he was keenly aware of the fact that this was being televised, and the people were expecting a certain kind of version. The big deal was we were going to do Nessun Dorma with him, his big operatic hit with the super high note at the end and the triumphant ending. John and I actually we thought that we were going to do like a mixing of genres kind of intro and then go into it. So John and I came up with this really cool blend of the theme of Nessun Dorma and kind of a gentle kind of improv, classical, with a little bit of rock improv into it. But it instantly got nixed. No, we got to do it like the record. All right, that was weird. But when we did the gig, it was a surprise whether he was going to hit that high note or not, because the guy, he was getting on in age, right? And at the rehearsal or sound check, he didn't do the high note, and so that became an exciting point. And he really knew how to milk it. So, of course, at the televised, concert, which is the finale of all the preparation and everything, he has, he feels it and does it. And, it was huge and triumphant and everything. Smoke, I don't know. I think I don't remember that as much as the Nessun Dorma.
Okay. It's a good experience, though. Yeah. So back to the Steve Morse Band, you guys opened up for Rush in 1986. It was Power Windows. Yeah. I love that album. It's my favorite 80s Rush album. Take me through that experience. What was that like being on the road with those guys?
Great. Just fantastic. The bar was always high with them. And I just getting to know Neil Peart and having him say that he rides his bicycle, 50 to 100 miles a day. I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No, I just finished a tour all through China." And so I was doing a guitar clinic before the show at a we're a town somewhere up in the north, well into the northeast, maybe in Maine or Vermont. And the guitar clinic was in a little music store on the main street. And it was all windows in front, with instruments for sale and stuff. And I was facing, that way, and the audience was facing me, looking away from the window. And I was, telling the story about, somebody said, "What's it like touring with Rush?" I said, "They're great guys, and they're great musicians, and they're wonderful to hang out with." And Neil rides his bike every day. It's so cool that he lives outside the box of the touring person. And so as I was saying that, I look out the window and Neil goes riding by on his bike. After riding, it was maybe coming from Madison to Milwaukee or so. It was some kind of achievable distance that he had done from the last motel. And here he was just crossing in front of me. In fact, and I said, "And there he goes now." And everybody laughs, I said, "No, really, he just pedaled by." And they laugh again because they think I'm still continuing the joke. I said, No, really, he just pedaled by on his bike. He's on his way to his motel before the sound check. So that was the funniest moment. But Alex was wonderful. He's a pilot, and we flew in my plane, one leg.
Oh.
We flew together when we were in California. I briefly lived in California, and so just wonderful guys to hang out with. And at the end, we all went to a dinner together. Both bands. It was definitely one of the highlights of my career.
Well, Steve, you got a lengthy career and a lot of great stories. I think I'm going to have to get you back on next year for a part 2 because there's a lot of part of your career we haven't covered. I would love to hear more about it. But in the meantime, I wish you best of luck with the Triangulation album and tour. So for more information on Steve Morse, head over to stevemorse.com for all of his news, tour dates, and links to his socials. Steve, I appreciate your time today. So for my guest today, Steve Morse, I'm Metal Walt, and this is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Bye-bye.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.